3 translators tried to finish her mother's diary. The first stopped at page 12 and never came back. The second sent a transcription with a note that said only "I am sorry" asterisk, and the third called Amara before saying anything else and told her asterisk she loved you on every single page. I needed you to know that first. What that diary contained was not just a story, it was a confession, a map, and a death certificate for a man who had spent 40 years believing that the infant he sold for $180,000, 3 days after her mother's body went cold in a locked room in his estate, would never have the language to come for him. He was wrong. Because that infant had grown up to become the most dangerous financial investigator in Europe, had spent 14 months building a case file 400 pages long before she ever walked through his door, had already purchased 40% of his debt before he learned her name, and was sitting in his archive room at that exact moment. Gloves on, hands steady, heartbeat controlled, photographing the ledger entry that recorded her own sale, next to her mother's name reduced to a single letter by a man who thought erasure was the same as disappearing. It was not. Adaeze had written in 2 languages in the dark so that no one in that house could read it, hidden the truth in the only place she had left, and whispered to her unborn daughter through the night about a sea she would never see. Because she knew, even dying, even alone, that one day someone would need the truth more than she needed silence. She was right. 40 years later, her daughter sat at the head of his boardroom table, signed the papers that dissolved everything he had ever built, named the foundation after her mother, and watched him read her name at the bottom of the transfer document with handcuffs already on his wrists. And the most terrifying thing about all of it was not the arrest, not the 47 cases in the file, not the empire reduced to nothing. It was that Amara never raised her voice. Not once. Because the most dangerous kind of revenge is not loud. It is patient, it is precise, and by the time you see it coming, it is already done. There is a kind of silence that does not feel like peace. It feels like a room where something was taken, where the walls still remember the shape of what used to be there, and the air has never quite recovered, and anyone who walks in can feel it without knowing why. Amara Kwandubois had lived inside that silence her entire life. She was 40 years old. She had a career that made grown men nervous and a reputation that preceded her into every room she entered. She had an apartment in Brussels with a window that faced west, because she liked to watch the light leave. She had colleagues who respected her and a handful of people she might have called friends if she were the kind of person who used that word loosely. She had, by every visible measure, built a complete life. And yet, there was always the silence, the particular emptiness that lived just beneath the surface of everything. Not depression, not loneliness exactly, but the feeling of a question that had never been asked out loud because she had never known quite how to form it. Where do I come from? Not Brussels. Not the kind, quiet couple who raised her and loved her genuinely and told her, when she was 7 and old enough to understand, that she had been adopted as an infant from South Korea, that her birth records were sealed, that all they knew was that she had come to them perfect and unnamed and theirs. She had accepted it. She had built around it. She had become, through discipline and intelligence and the particular determination of someone who has learned early that the world does not hand you foundations. You construct them yourself. She had become someone formidable. And then her adoptive parents died. Her father first, in the spring. Her mother 8 months later, as though she had simply decided that the world without him was not one she was willing to navigate. Amara cleared the house alone. She did not rush it. She moved through each room carefully, the way she moved through evidence, methodically, respectfully, aware that what she was handling had weight. In the back of her mother's wardrobe, behind a winter coat that still smelled faintly of her perfume, she found a locked metal box. Inside the box was a hospital photograph of a woman she did not recognize. A set of documents with her name on them, her original name, her Korean paperwork, seals and stamps from 1984. And a small diary, cloth-bound, dark green, pages slightly warped at the edges as though they had once been wet. Written in 2 languages, one she did not speak, one she spoke imperfectly, in handwriting so careful it looked like the writer had known, even then, that someone needed to be able to read it one day. Amara sat down on the floor of her mother's bedroom. She did not move for a very long time. If this moment pulled you in, stay with them. Subscribe and do not look away. Their story has already started. Stay with me. Like the video, subscribe for free, and comment your thoughts below. It took 3 translators to get through the diary. The first one stopped at page 12 and said she needed a few days. She never came back. The second completed pages 1 through 30 and sent the transcription with a note that said only, "I am sorry. I hope she finds peace." The third, a quiet academic who specialized in West African languages and had spent a decade in Seoul, translated the remaining pages and called Amara afterward. Not to discuss the content. Just to say, "I want you to know that she loved you. Every page. She loved you before you arrived and she loved you after. I needed you to know that first." Amara thanked her. She put down the phone. She picked up the complete transcription. She read it in one sitting. By page 10 she could not breathe. By page 30 she had stopped crying. Not because the grief had passed, but because something else had arrived alongside it. Something colder. More precise. Something that lived in the part of her that had spent 15 years dismantling the financial architectures of people who believed their crimes were too well hidden to ever be found. By the last page she had a name. Kwon Jae-won. She did not call the police. She opened a new case file. Her mother's name was Adaeze. She was 23 years old when she arrived in Seoul on a work visa in the spring of 1983. She came from Enugu, in southeastern Nigeria, from a family that was not wealthy but was warm. A mother who prayed every morning before the household woke. 2 younger brothers she was determined to provide for. She had been educated in a mission school. She spoke English precisely and Igbo beautifully and had taught herself enough Korean from a textbook to hold a basic conversation before she ever landed. She was, by every account in her own diary, a woman of extraordinary dignity. She found domestic work quickly. A placement agency connected her to a household in northern Seoul. A large estate behind walls that were higher than necessary for a residential property, staffed by people who did not meet each other's eyes in corridors. She noted this in her diary on her 3rd day. The other staff do not speak much. There is a silence here that I do not yet understand. I am trying to understand it. The man who owned the estate was Kwon Jae-won. He was 53 years old. Powerful in the way that men become powerful when they are willing to do the things that other men decide against. He had a legitimate face, a real estate development company, a charitable foundation, a name that appeared on donor lists and civic boards. He hosted dinners. He gave speeches. He shook hands with people who would have been horrified to know what his money was built on. Beneath the legitimate face was a trafficking network that had been operating for nearly a decade. His specialty was newborns, sold to wealthy couples across Asia and Europe who could not or would not navigate legal adoption channels. Korean infants, primarily. But there was a premium for something rarer. Mixed-race children. Afro-Korean babies commanded prices that made even Kwon's cold arithmetic widen. He began to notice Adaeze within weeks of her arrival. She wrote about it carefully, the way she always wrote, choosing her words as though she knew someone would need them later. He looks at me differently than he looks at the others. I do not know what it means yet. I am being careful. She was always careful. It was not enough. What followed, the isolation from other staff, the manufactured dependency, the exploitation disguised as preference, Adaeze recorded it all. Not in accusation. In the precise, heartbreaking language of a woman documenting her own entrapment because documentation was the only form of power available to her. When she understood she was pregnant, she wrote, "I am frightened. But I have decided that whatever comes, I will not disappear quietly. I will make sure someone knows I was here." She was given a room at the back of the estate. Her movements were restricted. She was told it was for her comfort, for the pregnancy. The supplements delivered each morning were not explained to her. She took them because refusal had consequences she could not afford. She kept writing. "I am 7 months now. The baby moves constantly, at night especially, as though she is trying to remind me she is there. I have decided she is a girl. I do not know why. I just know. I have been thinking about names. In my language, Amara means grace. I think that is what she will need in this world. Grace, and more strength than I have been able to hold on to. I am trying to hold on." She gave birth on a cold morning in October 1984. She held her daughter for a short time. She gave her the name she had chosen. The diary records this in handwriting that is slightly unsteady. Not from weakness, Amara had decided when she read it, but from emotion. 3 days later, Adaeze died from complications that went untreated. A doctor came after, not to help her, to sign a certificate that said something else entirely. Baby Amara was sold within the week. The buyer was a Belgian-Korean couple, childless, wealthy, desperate. They paid $180,000. They were told the birth mother had consented. They were told the paperwork was clean. They were good people who did not ask the questions they should have asked, because they were afraid the answers would cost them the child they already loved. They named her Amara. They kept her original given name. This, she would later decide, was the one act of grace in the whole machinery of what had been done to her. She grew up in Brussels. She was loved. She was educated. She became a forensic financial investigator who dismantled the hidden architectures of powerful men. And then, at 40 years old, sitting on the floor of a dead woman's bedroom with a cloth-bound diary in her hands, she understood for the first time what she had actually been preparing for. If you feel the chemistry building, stay close. Subscribe so you do not miss the next chapter. Comment what you think they are about to do. Stay with me. Like the video, subscribe for free, and comment your thoughts below. The case file she opened was not an official one. Not yet. She spent 4 months building it alone, in the evenings after her official work was done, on a laptop she had purchased with cash and registered to nothing. She was meticulous. She was patient. She did not rush because she had learned, across 15 years of this work, that the cases that fell apart were always the ones built in anger. She was not operating without anger. She was operating through it, which is a different thing entirely. She traced the money first. Always the money. The $180,000 paid for her in 1984 had not sat still. It had moved, through shell companies, through real estate acquisitions, through investment vehicles restructured 3 times in 40 years. But the origin was traceable if you knew how to read it. And Amara always knew how to read it. She found it still generating returns. A fund registered in the Cayman Islands, connected through 4 intermediary structures to a holding company in Seoul. Connected to Kwon Jae-won. He was 79 years old. He was still there. She began to understand the scale of what she was looking at. She found 47 cases spanning 1979 to 2001. 47. She sat with that number for a long time. 3 women she was able to trace with certainty. 2 were gone. 1 was not. Park Soo-yeon was 71 years old and lived in a small apartment in Busan, 2 blocks from the sea. She had worked as a nurse at a private clinic associated with the Kwon estate between 1981 and 2003. She had, for 20 of those years, signed paperwork she should not have signed. She was dying of cancer. She had also kept records of her own. Amara flew to Busan on a Tuesday in March. She found Park Soo-yeon looking at the water with the expression of someone who has made peace with most things and is still working on the rest. She had been expecting someone to come. I always knew, she said, that one of them would find me eventually. I hoped it would be before. She gestured at herself, at the weight she had lost, at the 4 line in her arm. I wanted to be useful. She was more than useful. She had kept a handwritten ledger, hidden inside the lining of a suitcase she had never unpacked after leaving the clinic in 2003. Names, dates, procedures. 2 decades of evidence stored because she had never been able to destroy it and had never been brave enough to use it. She handed it to Amara without being asked. I knew your mother, she said. I was there when you were born. A pause. She was a remarkable woman. She talked to you the whole time, told you about her mother, about her home, about the sea near where she grew up. She talked to you as though she knew you could hear her. Another pause, longer. I think you could. If this scene hit you, pause with me. Like the video if you felt it. Subscribe to keep following them. Comment whose heart is about to break. Stay with me. Like the video, subscribe for free, and comment your thoughts below. The journalist's name was Ji-woo Han, 34 years old, an investigative reporter for an independent media organization that had survived 3 attempts by powerful interests to shut it down. She had published 3 major investigations in the past 5 years, each one precise, each one devastating. Amara did not contact her to publish. She contacted her to witness. "I'm not ready for publication," she said. "I need someone to know that this material exists and where to find it if something happens to me." A pause. "You think something might happen to you?" "I think Kwon Jae-won has survived 7 to 9 years without consequences. I am not going to be naive about what that means." She sent Ji-woo the summary. Ji-woo called back in 40 minutes. Her voice was different. Quieter. The steady quiet of someone who has just understood the size of something and made a decision about it. "I'm in," she said. "Whatever you need. I'm in." Before we continue, quick question. Where in the world are you watching from? Drop it in the comments, and subscribe for free because the next story might be even crazier than this one. The first move was a form. A regulatory disclosure filed under a case number that gave nothing away, citing preliminary evidence of cross-border financial irregularities in entities connected to the Kwon Group. Routine compliance review. A box being ticked. Nothing to mobilize against. What it actually did was open the door. Kwon's lawyers assessed it as standard. They recommended cooperation. He agreed without concern. He had no reason not to. He did not know that the auditor assigned to his records was the child he had sold 40 years ago. She was given a temporary workspace on the 19th floor. Access to records. A liaison named Mr. O who answered questions she did not ask. She thanked him for the coffee. She asked for records going back 12 years, not 3. She watched his expression flicker. On the 3rd day she requested access to the physical archive. On the 5th day, in a sub-basement records room, she found the ledgers. 1979 to 2001. She worked alone. She waited until she heard Mr. O's footsteps fade down the corridor. Then she put on her gloves. And she opened the first ledger. The entries were coded. They would have been meaningless to anyone who did not already know what they were looking at. But Amara had 4 to 7 case files. She had Park Soo-yeon's ledger. She had her mother's diary and 14 months of cross-referencing. She knew exactly what the codes meant. She read through slowly. Confirmed entry after entry against her external records. And then she reached 1984. There were 3 entries in October. The 3rd one. N female infant. Healthy. Standard category. Sold. Belgian buyers. 180,000. She stood completely still for a very long time. There was no name for her mother. Just an initial. 1 letter. An erasure so complete it would have been invisible to anyone who did not already know who N was. But Amara knew. She photographed every page. She replaced every ledger. She walked to the elevator. She rode it to the 19th floor. She sat down at her desk. She opened her laptop. Her hands did not shake. She had her mother's voice in her head, the translated words, the careful precise handwriting of a woman who had decided she would not disappear quietly. "I will make sure someone knows I was here." Amara began to type. Someone knows, she thought. Someone knows. The first sign that something was wrong came on a Wednesday. Amara was on the 22nd floor reviewing a subsidiary's acquisition records when Mr. O appeared at her door with an expression he was working very hard to keep neutral. "Ms. Kwon Du Bois." He caught himself immediately. She had introduced herself as Ms. Amara. No surname, standard practice for external auditors. The slip was small. She filed it. "There has been a request," he said carefully, "from the chairman's office. He would like to meet with you this afternoon to discuss the scope of the review." Translation. "Someone has noticed what you are pulling." "Of course," Amara said pleasantly. 3 o'clock works well." Mr. O nodded and left. She waited until he turned the corner. Then she forwarded the last batch of photographed documents to 3 separate encrypted locations. Her personal server, Ji-woo Han's secure drop, and a 3rd location she had set up before she ever walked into this building. Then she straightened her jacket and went back to reading. Kwon Jae-won was seated behind his desk when she entered. He looked different than he had on the day she first walked into his office for the courtesy introduction. He was dressed the same, impeccably, as always, but something in the room had changed. There was an alertness to the stillness he wore. The patience of a predator, not a patriarch. Two men stood to his right. His head of legal, and a second man she recognized from her research. A senior partner at the firm that had handled Kwon Group's most sensitive matters for 30 years. She noted all of this in the 3 seconds it took her to cross the room. She sat down before being invited to. "Ms. Amara," Kwon said. His voice was exactly as she remembered it. Low, unhurried, calibrated for a specific effect. "Thank you for making time." "Of course, Chairman Kwon." She folded her hands in her lap. "How can I help?" "I wanted to check in on your progress personally." A pause. The kind that was designed to create discomfort. "Our teams have noted that your document requests have extended into archived records from several decades ago. Records outside the standard scope. The scope of a group-wide compliance review includes historical liability," Amara said. "Dormant entities and legacy transactions are standard territory. I sent a scope clarification to your legal team on day 3. They approved the extended range on day 15. The lawyer to Kwon's right shifted slightly. Amara did not look at him. She kept her eyes on Kwon. "Of course," Kwon said smoothly. "I simply wanted to ensure you have everything you need. And that our teams are being fully cooperative." "They have been excellent," she said. "I expect to complete the foundational review by end of next week. After that, I'll need access to 3 additional subsidiary structures before I can finalize." Something moved behind Kwon's eyes. She had just told him she was not finished. That she was going deeper. And she had said it in his office, in front of his lawyers, in a tone so professionally reasonable that stopping her would require him to explain why. Which would require him to know exactly what she had found. Which would require him to admit he knew what there was to find. She watched him calculate all of this in real time. "Wonderful," he said. His smile was perfect. "We look forward to the final report." She stood. She thanked him. She walked back to the elevator. She rode it down alone. She exhaled once, slow and controlled, and then she was composed again before the doors opened. That evening she called Ji-woo. "He knows something is happening," Amara said. "He doesn't know what yet. We have a window. I'd estimate 10 days before his lawyers find enough in the approved records to understand the direction I'm moving. What do you need from me?" "Start preparing the story structure. Don't write it yet. Just build the container. When I give you the signal, I need you to be ready to publish within 48 hours. A pause. "Amara, are you safe?" She looked out her hotel window at the Seoul skyline. At the lights of a city that had swallowed her mother whole and never once looked back. "I've been safe my whole life," she said. "It's time to be something else." The debt acquisition had begun 18 months before she ever set foot in Seoul. This was the part of the plan that required the most patience and the most precision, because it had to be invisible. Not just legally clean, but invisible. If Kwon's financial team traced the purchasing activity back to a single buyer, they would restructure before she could move. So she didn't buy as a single buyer. She built a legal investment fund, registered in Luxembourg, managed by a nominee director with immaculate credentials, funded through 3 layers of institutional investors who each believed they were participating in a distressed asset recovery vehicle. Which they were. They simply did not know which assets, or why. The target was the Kwon Hotel Group, 7 luxury properties across South Korea and Southeast Asia, heavily leveraged after an aggressive expansion in 2019 that had been further damaged by the following years of reduced international travel. The group carried approximately 340 billion Korean won in debt across 4 lending institutions. Amara's fund, over the course of 16 months, acquired the lending position of 2 of those institutions. She now held, quietly and completely legally, approximately 40% of the Kwon Hotel Group's total debt. She had said nothing. She had waited. On the morning of the 10th day inside the Kwon Group Tower, Amara submitted the formal regulatory filing. Not the preliminary one. The full one. 4 to 7 cases. Complete financial documentation. The physical ledger evidence photographed and certified. Park Soo-yeon's testimony, recorded, witnessed, legally notarized in Busan 3 weeks earlier. Cross-jurisdictional financial flows traced to present-day active accounts. A case file 412 pages long, assembled across 14 months, that left nothing to interpretation and nothing to chance. She filed it at 9:07 in the morning. At 9:22, she sent a single message to Ji Woo-han. Now, at 9:45, she called the loan. Do not walk away now. This is where everything changes. If you are still here, you are part of this story. Stay with me. Like the video, subscribe for free, and comment your thoughts below. The next 72 hours moved the way avalanches move, slowly at first, then all at once. The regulatory filing triggered an automatic cross-jurisdictional alert. Within 6 hours, accounts connected to 3 Kwon Group entities were frozen pending review across South Korea, the Cayman Islands, and Singapore. Kwon's legal team filed an immediate challenge. It was denied on procedural grounds. The evidence threshold had been met and exceeded. Ji Woo's story went live at noon. Not a fragment. Not a preliminary piece. The full investigation, 4 to 7 cases, the ledger, Park Soo-yeon's testimony on record, the financial architecture laid out in language precise enough for lawyers and human enough for everyone else. Every major outlet picked it up within 2 hours. By evening, it was the top story across 3 countries. Kwon Jae-won issued a statement through his lawyers. It described the allegations as baseless and the filing as politically motivated. It was exactly the statement his lawyers always wrote for moments like this. Designed for a world where the evidence was incomplete, where witnesses could be pressured, where documentation could be challenged on technical grounds. It had no power here. Because the evidence was not incomplete. Amara had made certain of it. The loan call was processed on the 3rd day. The Kwon Hotel Group, unable to refinance under the weight of the regulatory freeze and the reputational collapse happening in real time, could not meet the accelerated repayment demand. The hotels went into receivership. A court-appointed administrator was required. Amara's fund, as the senior debt holder, had the right to nominate. She nominated herself. She sat in his boardrooms. She signed the papers that transferred the hotel group's assets into the receivership estate. She reviewed the liquidation schedule. She directed the process with the same methodical precision she had brought to every audit of every powerful man who had ever believed his architecture was too complex to be dismantled. It was not complex. It was just large. Large and large were not the same thing, and Amara had always understood the difference. One by one, across 3 weeks of legal proceedings, the structures Kwon Jae-won had spent 40 years building were dissolved. The hotel group, the holding companies, the real estate subsidiaries, the investment vehicles, the charitable foundation, which, once its donor records were examined, was found to have served primarily as a tax mechanism and a source of social legitimacy rather than any actual charitable function. All of it, gone. The recovered funds amounted to, after legal costs and creditor settlements, approximately 89 billion Korean won. Amara directed every remaining one into a newly established foundation. She had decided on the name before she ever filed the first document. Before she got on the plane to Seoul. Before she called the first translator. On the night she sat on the floor of her mother's bedroom and read the last page of a diary written by a woman who had decided she would not disappear quietly. The foundation was called the Adaeze Trust. Its mandate: support for children affected by trafficking, internationally. Legal aid. Rehabilitation. The kind of dignified, practical help that did not ask survivors to perform their trauma in order to deserve assistance. Its founding document included, in the preamble, a single paragraph that Amara had written herself and would not allow anyone to edit. This foundation is named for Adaeze, a woman who came to a foreign country with hope, was betrayed by the powerful, and chose, even in her darkest moment, to leave behind a record of her truth. She did not disappear quietly. This is the proof. Kwon Jae-won was arrested on a Tuesday morning. He was at his private residence, a property that was no longer, technically, his, though the transfer paperwork had not yet reached him. He was having breakfast. His security detail had been reduced by half in the preceding weeks as his financial position collapsed and his ability to fund them evaporated. 4 officers arrived at 8 in the morning. He came to the door himself. He was 7 to 9 years old and he had lived his entire life as a man who was not afraid at doors, because doors always opened for him, and what was on the other side always bent toward his will. He looked at the officers. He understood immediately. He said nothing. He was, to the end, a man of composed surfaces. As he was walked to the vehicle, his lawyer appeared at his side, breathless, arriving too late to prevent anything, able only to hand him a document that had just been served. The lawyer said nothing. There was nothing useful to say. Kwon took the document. He read it as he stood on the steps of a house that no longer belonged to him, in the cold morning air of a city that had spent 40 years treating him as untouchable. It was a transfer notice. The final consolidation of the receivership estate, a legal formality, the last document in a chain of documents that had been building for 3 weeks. It listed the assets transferred, the legal basis, the effective date. And at the bottom, in the space marked appointed administrator and foundation director, a name. Amara Adaeze Kwon Dubois. He read it once. He read it again. The officers waited. His lawyer waited. The morning waited. Kwon Jae-won stood very still. And somewhere in the architecture of his composed and careful face, in the precise ordering of features that had survived decades of scrutiny without cracking, something gave way. Not dramatically. Not loudly. Just a slight loosening around the eyes. A fraction of something that in another man might have been recognized as understanding. He finally knew who had come for him. He had sold her at birth. He had erased her mother's name to a single letter. He had built 40 years of wealth and status on the assumption that the things he had done were too far buried and too long ago to ever find their way back to him. He had been wrong. She had found every name. Amara was not there when it happened. She had decided, early on, that she would not be. She had considered it, had imagined the scene, had felt the pull of it. The desire to stand somewhere visible and let him see her face and understand with his eyes what his mind was only beginning to accept. She had decided against it. Not from mercy. From a different understanding entirely. She did not need him to see her. She had never been doing this for him to see her. She was doing it for Adaeze, who had written in the dark in a language no one in that house could read, who had chosen a name meaning grace for a child she would only hold for a short time, who had decided that she would not disappear quietly and had been right. She was doing it for the 4 to 6 other cases in the file. For the women recorded in a ledger as initials and amounts. For the children who had grown up, like her, with a silence they could not name. She was doing it because someone had to. And because she, specifically, precisely, by the particular shape of her life and her skills and her history, was the one who could. She had found Adaeze's grave 6 weeks before the arrest. It had taken a separate investigation, quiet, personal, conducted on weekends and evenings while the official case was still being built. A death certificate, even a falsified one, created a paper trail. A burial record existed somewhere. Bodies did not simply vanish, even when powerful men wished they would. She found it in a municipal cemetery on the eastern edge of Seoul. A small marker. A date. Initials only, N.A., which was not even her full name, which was a final erasure so routine it was almost careless. Amara had the marker replaced. The new one read, Adaeze, beloved, and not forgotten. Nothing more. She had thought about more, about Inugu, about the mission school, about the younger brothers Adaeze had been sending money home to when she arrived in Seoul. She had thought about putting all of it on the stone. In the end she decided that the most important thing, the thing her mother had wanted most, the thing she had written toward in the dark with a careful hand in 2 languages, was simply to be known. To exist in a record that told the truth. To not disappear quietly. She was there. She mattered. She was not forgotten. That was enough. That was everything. Like the video if the ending surprised you. Comment your reaction or your theory. Subscribe for free so you do not miss the next story. 3 months after the arrest, Ji-woo had published a second piece. Not about Kwon. About Adaeze. It was not an investigation. It was a portrait, built from the diary, from Park Soo-yeon's memories, from records Ji-woo had found in Enugu through a researcher she had hired locally. Adaeze's school records. A letter she had written to her mother 2 weeks before she died, which had never been sent, which had been found among her possessions and stored in a box in Kwon's estate archive, catalogued as miscellaneous personal effects, domestic stuff, kept because discarding it would have required acknowledging it existed. The letter was published in full, in Igbo and in translation. It described Seoul in the early spring, the way the cherry blossoms came suddenly and covered everything. It described the food Adaeze had learned to cook and the words she had added to her Korean vocabulary. It described her daughter, the daughter she had not yet delivered but already knew, already loved, already named. She will be extraordinary, the letter said. I cannot explain how I know. I just know. Some things you know before they have happened. She will be extraordinary, and she will know that I loved her, because I will find a way to make sure of it. I always find a way. Amara read the letter 3 times in a cafe near her hotel. She had read it before, in translation, months earlier. But seeing it published, seeing her mother's words exist in a record that anyone in the world could now access, that was indexed and archived and permanent, was different from holding the transcription alone in a rented apartment. Her mother had said she would find a way. She had found a way. Through a cloth-bound diary. Through a locked box in the back of a wardrobe. Through 40 years and 3 translators and 1 forensic financial investigator who had spent her entire career, without knowing why, without being able to name the silence that drove her, preparing for exactly this. Adaeze had been right. She was extraordinary. And she knew, now, that she was loved. The Adaeze Trust opened its first regional office in Lagos 18 months after its founding. Its second in Busan, at the specific request of Park Soo-yeon, who had lived longer than her doctors predicted and had spent her remaining months giving testimony, giving interviews, and telling anyone who would listen about a young Nigerian woman she had met in 1984 who had talked to her unborn child through the night and named her Grace. Its third in Brussels, in a building 3 streets from the house where Amara had grown up, where 2 good people had loved a child they did not fully understand the origin of, and had kept her name, and had kept a box they perhaps should have opened sooner, and had loved her genuinely and completely anyway. She forgave them for the box. She had decided this before they died. She had told her father, in his last week, in a hospital room that smelled of antiseptic and winter. He had cried. She had held his hand. Some things were done to people, not by them. She knew the difference. She had always known the difference. That was the thing about growing up inside a silence you could not name. It taught you to listen very carefully to everything underneath what people said. To read what was not written. To find what had been hidden. To make sure that the people who chose to disappear quietly were told, with evidence, with documentation, with the full and irrefutable weight, that some of us do not stay disappeared. And that is where her story ends, and where yours begins. If this story moved you, if Adaeze's name means something to you now, if Amara's 40 years felt like something you needed to see through to the end, then do one thing before you leave this video. Like it, so that this story reaches someone else who needs it. Subscribe for free, because the next story on this channel will hit just as hard, and you do not want to miss it. And drop a comment below. Tell me, which moment stayed with you the longest? Was it Adaeze writing in the dark? Amara finding her own name in the ledger? Or the moment he finally understood who came for him? Tell me in the comments. I read every single one. This has been Afro-Korean Tales TV. My name is in the comments. And I will see you in the next story.